Welcome to Is It the Podcast? From Rembrandt to Rubens, from Van Dyck to Van Eyck, each episode examines an artwork with an uncertain authorship, in dialogue with a leading guest expert. We'll tell the story of the artist we suspect created the work, of the work in question, and then we reveal the results of a cutting-edge AI authentication analysis performed by the Swiss firm Art Recognition. I'm your host, Professor Noah Charney. So, is it? Today we have a special episode of Is It the Art Mystery Podcast. My guest is not an art historian, but one of the world's best-selling writers, novelist Steve Berry. Steve and I met each other when he was doing research for one of his many New York Times and internationally best-selling novels, The Omega Factor, which has a thriller plot built around the true history of the Ghent Altarpiece. Steve reads hundreds of sources for research before he starts writing, and my book, Stealing the Mystic Lamb, was one of them. I was honored to be an expert consultant on the true history of Jan van Eyck's Mystic Lamb for a writer I very much admire. What I like particularly about Steve's books is that he is a popular novelist in love with history and determined to get things right and not mislead his readers. At the end of each of his novels, there's a section in which he lays out what he changed from known history to suit the plot, so the reader will be clear as to what is real and what is fiction. This conversation is informal and not in the format we usually use for this podcast, but we did test a painting using Art Recognition's AI image analysis, and it is the very painting, or at least one panel of it, that was the subject of Steve's book, The Omega Factor. I'll tell the story during our chat, so stay tuned. We'll speak to an author who sells a book somewhere on planet Earth every 30 seconds, and whose plots are based on art historical mysteries. And we'll ask about the authorship of the 12th panel of the Ghent Altarpiece, stolen in 1934 and, at least in theory, never recovered. So, Steve, thanks so much for taking the time to join me on Is It the Art Mystery Podcast. First of all, can you tell me a little bit about how you got interested in art historical mysteries and artifacts as the basis for the plots of your novels?
Well, my favorite kind of books are action, history, secrets, conspiracies. I mean, those are my books. They used to be called spy novels. They now call them international suspense thrillers. So once you get that interest in that particular area, you got to have things that will interest a reader, things that will interest me, things that are fascinating. And in the art world, there's just an abundance of that stuff. I mean, just a lot of it. I've done quite a few books with art and ancient artifacts. It's fascinating to me. Art in the medieval days was not something that was done haphazardly. There were methods to the madness. There were purposes behind things. There was a lot going on there. And all of that fascinates me. So they make for really good stories.
One of the things I really appreciate with your novels is how much research you do before you begin writing. I think you once said that you average about 100 sources per book. How do you look into the research before you begin the writing? What's your research process like?
It's actually 300 to 400 sources per book.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Is what it is. And they're mostly 95% of those are physical books. I like physical books because I like indexes. I need indexes. I don't read 300 to 400 books, but I do read large portions of 300 to 400 books. And I accumulate a stack of notes about 4 inches tall. Of course, I can't use all those. I'm only going to use a small portion of that, but I still have to accumulate all the information in one place. Once I decide on the thing from the past, all of my novels take something from the past, something real, and I weave a modern day thriller around this thing from the past that still matters today. And I call that thing from the past the ooh factor, the thing that kind of makes you go, ooh, that's pretty cool. And, I've had quite a few of interesting ooh factors over the years. They're usually things that people don't know a lot about. My new book that comes out next week deals with the Devil's Bible, which is the largest book in the world. That's in the Stockholm Library. That's been there for 400 years. These kinds of things are what interest me. And so I then begin the research process. I do a lot of the research at a used bookstore that's about 2 hours from my house. I used to live 30 minutes from it, but it's called the Chamblin Book Mine, and it's a humongous place. And he probably, the owner of that store is a man named Ron Chamblin. He probably has 10,000 volumes just in the history section. It's huge. And I used to go up there about once a month. I'd go into there. Now I don't go quite as often. And I get most of my books from there. He has an enormous selection to pick from. Others I buy online. I locate them and buy them. Others I buy when I go on a research trip, because every novel, it takes at least one research trip. So I accumulate all of this together. I was just doing that, by the way. You caught me back here. I pulled some stuff off the shelf here that I bought when I was in Romania, because I'm writing a book now on Romania, and I've got to go through this stuff now. It's time now to go through this material. I try to do it in sections. I can't do it all at once. It's overwhelming, and plus it will mess up the plotting. So I do it in sections. And now it's time to go through this material. About 10, 12 booklets, pamphlets. I buy everything I can find when I'm on the ground, and I bring it all back home, and then I go through it here. So it's a 6-month process for me before I write a word. And then it's a 12-month process to write. And I do more research during that. It's an 18-month process. Now, those overlap. Those books will overlap each other. The 6 months of preliminary research is done while I'm writing the book before, so that I keep going. And I've learned to do it where I can keep it moving along, so that once I finish a novel, I'm ready to start the next one. I'm ready to go.
Do you remember the first historical tidbit that you thought was the tip of an iceberg that you could turn into a novel plot, the one that really got the ball rolling for you to this be your winning formula?
I do recall that. I recall it vividly. I was at home one night alone, and a little pygmy rattlesnake had gotten into the house. They're only about this long, but they're very poisonous. They can be as poisonous as a regular rattlesnake. And there he was sitting on the floor in my office. And so I went and got this Tupperware container, and I'm trying to catch this snake without getting bit. And on the television was a show from the History Channel, and they were talking about something called the Amber Room. I had never heard of it before, and I only caught snippets of it. Made of amber in Russia, Germans stole it, never seen again. I never got a lot of detail, but it was just, I could hear it, and I was going like, it's really, I eventually got the snake underneath, got him out, and got him out of the house. By that time, the show was over. So I went down to Jacksonville, to the Barnes and Noble down there. And this is back in the 93, 94. No internet, none of that then, So I went down and I got a travel book from Russia, and I discovered what the Amber Room was. And that's where that was born from. And that was probably the first time that I saw an idea, I gelled in my mind, and I made it into a novel. And then that became 12 years later. It was about, I wrote that book in 95. It was published in 2002. So it was 7 years after I wrote it that it finally made it to print.
That's amazing. And then the success you've had since then is astonishing. I read somebody calculated that you sell an average of a book every 30 seconds.
Yes, that's what they tell me.
I got to start eating whatever your special sauce is. That is absolutely incredible.
Yeah, it's we looked at the total number of sales and did the math. Actually, someone else did it first, and then I got kind of interested in it because it was kind of fascinating. And it's about every 30 seconds. Now it's a little under that. It's about every 25 seconds or so.
That is absolutely amazing. So what was if we look at the Amber Room book that took such a long time to find a home and get a foothold, was that also the first commercial success for you, or was it a later book that really got things going?
The Amber Room was the fourth manuscript I ever wrote. It was the first to ever be published. I started writing in 1990, and I wrote my first novel in 1990. From the day I wrote my first word to the day I sold my first word was 12 years. And during that time, I wrote 8 different manuscripts. 5 went to New York, rejected 85 times. I made it the 86th time, 12 years after I started. So the Amber Room, the Romanov Prophecy, and the Third Secret were 3 of those 8. So they made it. Kaiser's Web was another one of those. It made it. The List was another one. It made it. So 5 of the 8 have made it to publication, which is pretty cool. I tell writers all the time, don't throw away your words now because that you can use them.
When did you decide on your most famous character, Cotton Malone? How long did it take you to get a feel for who that character was and also recognize that he was someone that readers would like to remain with for multiple novels as opposed to using just once?
Well, I had published Amber Room, Romanoff Prophecy, and Third Secret, and they'd all done really well. In fact, Third Secret was my first top 15 New York Times bestseller. So they had done really good. And Random House came to me and said, why don't we do a series? And I said, well, I don't know. I don't read series. The only series I ever read was Clive Cussler and Dirk Pitt, and that's not really a series. Each one of those books are kind of their own little thing. So I didn't know much about writing a series, but I said, well, let's try it. So we created Cotton Malone. He came to me when I was in Copenhagen, and I was in Hybroad Plads, which is a square there, and I was sitting in the Cafe Nordon on the second floor looking out on a lovely spring evening. And he kind of popped in my head. He said he's going to live here. He's going to have a bookshop right over there. He's going to be a former Justice Department operative who has retired but gets himself back into trouble quite a bit. And so I went back home, and I had already started a novel with a character named Cotton Malone, but a totally different guy. I threw that away, started over, and I wrote The Templar Legacy.
Oh, wow.
And it became a huge bestseller. In fact, to this day, it is my largest selling book. I was not arrogant enough to think that I was going to get to write 20 novels with Cotton, because the 20th one comes in next week. So I wrote the best book I can one time and won and out, and that'd be great. But it caught on, and each book built onto that. And now here we are 20 books later.
Is there sort of an end in sight for series starring him, or can you imagine it going on indefinitely?
I want it to go forever. That's how I eat.
I think your fans do too. Yes, fair enough.
It's the only way I can eat, so I want him to keep going. I've spun off a little bit. There's been some Luke Daniels books, who's a secondary character in the Malone universe. And he's had 2 books, a third one coming. I've done Cassiopeia Witt, who's his love interest. I've done novellas with her. So we've branched out a little from there. Cotton's world has changed a lot in 20 years. Cotton has changed a lot in 20 years. He's not the same guy he was in the Templar Legacy. And starting with the Atlas Maneuver 2 books ago, I've begun to disrupt his world a little bit. Things are changing in Cotton's world. A lot is changing, in fact, in Cotton's world. And Atlas Maneuver, the Medici Return, now the Devil's Bible. There'll be another one in 2028. There's a lot going to be happening in Cotton's world as things begin to change for him. So the readers are going to get there's some surprises coming down the road.
So the theme of this podcast is looking at paintings that have questionable authorship, and then testing the authorship of the painting using this very new and very exciting AI image analysis technology. And I was just giving a lecture online. Actually, as soon as we finish recording this, you're going to be my guest on my Yale course. And we're talking about some of the ways that people have authenticated artworks in the past. And I describe it as AI as the 4th leg of a chair. So the 3 legs, we have connoisseurship, that's expert opinion, based on research and based on having seen lots of works by the artist in question, but it still comes down to subjective opinion as to who created the work. We have provenance research, provenance being the documented history of an object. Does the paperwork suggest that the object is authentic? And the third one is material forensic testing. So looking at the physical object and seeing, is it of the correct age to be what the experts think it is? Is the pigment or the paints, is it anachronistic? Are there any problems materially? And for the longest time, until really just a few years ago, those were the 3 ways that art was authenticated. And then AI stepped in, and it gave the possibility for this 4th leg, which is the thing that I got excited about. It's not replacing the others, but the concept is that you have a closed data set. So this isn't AI like Chat or Gemini or Copilot that's open to the internet, but a closed set. And the specialists, who are usually human art historians, feed this closed data set with images that are confirmed through best practice of scholars as by the artist in question, usually basing it on the catalog raisonné. And then they also feed this closed data set negative images, so teaching it what not to be fooled by. So they're adding, feeding it copies after an artist, forgeries, AI generated images in the style of an artist, and they're teaching it how not to be fooled. And then you show it a new work and you ask, does this new work look like it's by the artist in question? And it's been remarkably good at determining whether it does or not. And it gives a probability. And it also gives a heat map so you can see which parts of the work are more likely by the artist in question. And through this, we've made some exciting discoveries in the first season. For example, there are 3 versions of the lute player. And the question is, how many are by Caravaggio? One in the Hermitage, everyone agrees is by it. And then there were 2 that divided scholars. And we were able to identify that one is indeed a Caravaggio and one is not. And then just last week, in fact, we were in The Guardian again because there was a Jan van Eyck painting, or rather suspected to be by him. And he's the subject of today's episode as well. In the Philadelphia Museum of Art, St. Francis receiving the stigmata, that turns out that it tested as not by Van Eyck, whereas everybody seemed to think it was. And then we tested a copy of it, or rather what I assumed would be the original that's in the museum in Turin. And that also tested as not by Van Eyck. And so that was why it was in the paper, because it was a big surprise. And it suggests that there is a third painting that was probably mostly by Van Eyck's hand that's still out there. So it's exciting times. I could imagine maybe AI as a plot element in some future book of yours. But I was curious if you had integrated in any of your novels the questions of authenticity and authorship and forgery. I know the answer to this, but I'm not sure that all of our listeners do.
Oh yeah. That's certainly an element that I use constantly. I want something that there's a lot of questions about. That's exactly what I want. In fact, what I really want is something that has a lot of questions about it that no one knows the answers to, because then I can make up whatever answer I please and use it however I want to. What I do though, when I do that, is always in the back of my book is a writer's note, and the writer's note tells you what's true, what's false, where I play games with it. And I would tell you that if I did that in the back. I use Van Eyck, of course, in the Ghent Altarpiece, and the Omega Factor, was a very big deal in that book. And there's a lot of questions associated with the altarpiece. There are quite a few of who painted it, who sketched it, there's a lot of things in there. You, of course, are the expert on that. You wrote the book on the subject, which I used very much in when I was writing the novel. So I like that. I want to find things that have a lot of questions to it. Definitely. I've not used AI or anything because, to be honest with you, finding the painter is not critical in my stories. Finding the meaning is.
Yeah, sure.
Yes, very much so.
That's actually how we first met, that you wrote to me when you were researching for the Omega Factor. And I was really honored to be able to be a consultant for you. And I really appreciate that, both as a writer and as a professor of art history, that you have those writer's notes in the back of your book. So there's no danger that the reader is going to be accidentally misled into thinking that elements that you added for the sake of the plot are part of the confirmed history. And without naming any names, that's something that other writers in your field don't always do with the same dedication and transparency that you do. So it's much appreciated by people like me.
I just want to make it clear. I don't want what usually happens. You think something's false and it turns out to be true. That's what the usual surprise is. And because I try to keep the books about 90% to reality, to fact. I keep them as close as I can possibly keep them. But I do have to trip it up some. It's just the way it works because I'm writing a novel. I'm not writing a textbook. You're writing nonfiction, so you've got to be precise in everything. I don't have to be precise in everything, but I do have to entertain you. But I want you to know where I played those games.
It's important enough to you that you founded a nonprofit that deals with history and teaching history. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, we do. Historic preservation is what we do. Elizabeth and I, my wife Elizabeth and I, created History Matters about 17 years ago, and we help communities raise money for historic preservation. We've done all kinds of things: buildings, cemeteries, books, museums, posters, You name it, we've raised money for it. A little over $2.5 million for about 70 different projects. And it's been very gratifying. The way we raise the money is we teach a writer's workshop. We'll go in, teach a workshop. You buy your way in with a contribution. It's usually a couple $100. All of that money goes to the project. We don't charge to come. We pay our own way to come, actually. And it's just a good way that writers can contribute to historic preservation, but also get some teaching along the way. And it worked out very well. We did really well. COVID slowed things down. We've been cranking things back up the last year or two.
It's really lovely that you do that. And also that your novels are portals for people to get interested in sort of back alleys of history, usually through objects. And I think that's a great way to do it, through artworks or artifacts or monuments. And I also love the component that you include, which is dealing with lost works. Of course, I have a book museum of lost art that deals exclusively with all of the treasures that at the time that they existed were sometimes more important than the works that happen to have survived. But as soon as I hear the word lost, I kind of get the hackles on the back of my neck pop up, because I think it's quite exciting, because there's a world of real life treasure hunts out there. And it seems logical that we could begin with that and start to weave a work of fiction around it. But the respect that you show for the real history is something that I think is quite unusual among novelists. So really, hats off for that.
Thank you so much. And that word lost always piques my interest too. Secrets and lost.
Exactly. There's this handful of keywords: secret, hidden, riddle, puzzle, cipher, lost. You could almost throw those words in like a hat.
There you go. All those grab my attention instantly. Yeah.
So the work of art that we got together about, the Ghent Altarpiece, the test for today's episode, because this is honestly, I'm just a fan and was delighted that you were up for coming on. So this is mostly an excuse to have a chat with you. It's out of our normal format. But what I did was ask Art Recognition, the AI image analysis firm, to test the Just Judges panel from the Ghent Altarpiece. And this features in the Omega Factor. It features in my book, Stealing the Mystic Lamb. And just briefly, do you want to tell the audience the story briefly, or do you want me to, about what's interesting about the judges panel?
I hate to get anything wrong. You're the expert on it. I remember the story pretty much, but you know it exactly. So
Okay. Yeah, you know the story. So this is for the sake of our listeners. So the Ghent Altarpiece was begun by Hubert van Eyck, Jan's older brother. But Hubert died in 1426, the first year of the painting. And it's unlikely, although there are scholars who think it's possible, that any of the surface paintings still by Hubert. And it appears that Jan van Eyck inherited the project and completed it. He finished it in 1432. And it's the most frequently stolen artwork in history. It's been just about anything bad that can happen to a work of art has happened to it. And the incident that is relevant here is in 1934. One of the 12 panels was stolen. It was a two-sided panel split vertically during a previous incident. So there was a recto and verso. And it was stolen in the night from St Bavo Cathedral in Ghent. We know who the mastermind was, a guy named Arsène Hudetier. And he appears to have designed the theft based on the plot of his favorite novel, The Hollow Needle, by Maurice Leblanc. And Maurice Leblanc, to Francophone readers, is as popular as Arthur Conan Doyle is with the Sherlock Holmes character to British readers and American readers. So this is really like the Sherlock Holmes series of the French-speaking world. And Maurice Leblanc has a character named Arsène Lupin, or Arsène Lupin, who is an elegant cat burglar who is non-violent and steals jewelry and art. And in one of his novels, The Hollow Needle, he steals something and holds it for ransom. But the trick is that he steals it but hides it on the premises of the person he stole it from. So he never actually takes it away. And this seems to have been the basis for the concept of how the judges panel was stolen from St Bavo Cathedral, but we don't know who the thieves were. Arsène Hudetier was not physically capable of doing the stealing himself. So there are mysteries involved. But he started writing to the bishopric of Ghent. He asked for a ransom. The ransom was not paid. There were a total of 12 ransom notes exchanged. And the police got nowhere. And then Arsène Hudetier, who was a stockbroker, collapses at a political rally in a village outside of Ghent, gets taken to his cousin's house, and he calls his lawyer, a guy named George DeVos, and with his last words, he tells him to go look in a drawer in his writing desk, and then he dies with perfect cinematic timing. And in that writing desk, the lawyer finds carbon copies of all the ransom notes, plus a 13th note that suggests that the judge's panel is hidden somewhere where not even the thief can retrieve it without attracting public attention. And this is a true story, and it launched this, weekend detectives scoping out Ghent and the surroundings, looking for where this lost altarpiece panel might be. And it's still missing. And there are regular hints in the news. There's still a Ghent police officer. In the past, I've been in touch with them, in charge of this cold case. They get around 100 tips a year still, and this was stolen back in 1934. And there have been some crazy ones. One said that it was buried next to a skeleton beneath a parking lot in Ghent, and they dug it up, and they did find a skeleton, but they didn't find the painting. There was I do some TV presenting, and I did a BBC series, and we went to Ghent, and we actually found behind the rood screen inside the parish church in Veken, which is the little village where Arsène Houdetier was from. In the back of the rood screen, there was the outline and the exact dimensions of the stolen judge's panel, where it had hung long enough that dirt had settled around it. But of course, it wasn't there. But we were able to film it for the series, and it's still missing. So why is this important? Well, in 1945, a very quirky character named Jan van Eyck, who was the chief restorer at the Musée des Beaux-Arts in Brussels, he created, without anyone asking him to, a replacement panel for the just judges. And he was quite a character. He was famous as a restorer, but he liked to play a game with audiences, and he would try to imitate the painting style of the artist who he was restoring so precisely that nobody could tell the difference between his work and Van Eyck or Van der Weyden or Hans Memling or these famous Flemish artists that he was imitating. He was also, it turns out, an art forger. And Hermann Göring, the second in command of the Nazis, when he fled Germany to try to escape the Allies into Switzerland, brought 7 of his favorite paintings with him. And one of them was a Hans Memling that was actually painted by Jan van Eyck. So he's a really quirky character. And he volunteers, here, I made this replacement panel for the stolen one. And he gives it as a gift in 1945 to the Church of St Bavo, and it gets installed with all of the 11 original panels. And we fast forward now to the 1970s, and a conservator named Joost Trottijn shows up at St Bavo Cathedral to check on the Ghent Altarpiece for his annual cleaning to make sure the state of it is not deteriorating, and he does a double take. And he sees what he thinks is original 15th century craquelure. So craquelure is the French term for the web of cracks that appear naturally in oil paints when the support that they're painted on has expanded and contracted over time due to changes in humidity. And it looks like a sort of black web of cracks. And all of a sudden, he thought this painting that he thought was from 1945 suddenly had centuries-old craquelure. And he was suspicious, what if Jan van Eyck was involved in the theft of the judge's panel? And when the ransom demand failed, he painted over the stolen panel in a thin layer of oils as a way to surreptitiously return the panel to the bishopric at Ghent, St Bavo Cathedral at Ghent, without them realizing it was the stolen original. And after several decades of exposure to light, the surface oil paint had deteriorated, and this conservator was seeing the original painting underneath. That was the question mark. And this has never been tested before with AI image analysis to be sure that this replacement panel is not actually the stolen original. So that's what I had tested for today's episode.
What's the result?
So the result, I'm pleased to say, is a 71.66% certainty that it is not authentic. Now, what does that mean? So that tests the whole surface of the image in question. And it is definitive that it's not by Jan van Eyck's hand. The next step would be, and would be very complicated, and we haven't yet done this in the sphere of AI image analysis, would be to train the AI to recognize the hand of a forger and then go back to the same panel and say, okay, it's 71.66% certain that it's not by Jan van Eyck. Fair enough. But can we now test it and see if it is by this forger? That we haven't done yet. That could be for a future episode. But this means, the fact that it's not 100% inauthentic means that the forger did a really good job of imitating Van Eyck's style, but not good enough to fool the AI. Basically, anything over 60% is considered slam dunk, really definitive. So that closes one chapter. It means that the stolen panel has not been secretly returned, but that just opens another one. It means it's still out there, and Cotton Malone's got to get looking for it.
I used a lot of that in the novel. I modified it a little bit, but I used a lot of that in the novel. And the 12th panel, that was actually the original title of the book too, by the way, the 12th panel. And we changed it to the Omega Factor. But the 12th panel figures into the novel, but there's another thing that's really interesting about the Ghent Altarpiece, and you might know the answer to this question. When I started writing the book, I was looking for stuff in the panel that I could use in my treasure hunt, because that thing's been studied 8 billion times. Okay. There's no shockers in there, surprises in there. So I went on to the site that has the high definition images. And so I took it and I went through it. I went through the panels piece by piece in super high res. And in the center panel, in the center of the center panel, up in the top, very off in the distance, is a house. It's a house that's there. And you can only see it when you zoom in. You can't see it at normal. It looks like a smudge normal. And when I was there, and I actually went there before that panel was restored, so I saw the smudge. That house I used in the novel. I said that I made that house real. And Van Eyck put that in there on purpose. There's a reason he put it there. During the restoration, they took that house away. It's gone. It's not on that panel anymore. I went to get it when the book was published. I went to get an image of that house, and the restored panel, it's gone. It's not there. So what do you think? That was something added later by someone?
The restoration did, most of what it did was remove things that they determined were overpaintings that had happened after Van Eyck's period. So they must have determined that it was added at a later date, like the face of the Mystic Lamb itself, which looks very creepy now. It was changed in the Victorian period to look more like a lamb and less like a sort of creepy humanoid alien as it does now. But yeah, so they must have determined that it was a later overpainting. But that doesn't necessarily change the intrigue, because sometimes later overpaintings were meant to hide things. For example, and I realize that we should finish up because in 15 minutes you're about to appear in my Yale class. But in an earlier lesson in my Yale class, I taught about Hans Holbein's The Ambassadors. And that was a great unsolved mystery as to what the meaning of that complex painting was, until conservators realized that in the top left corner, someone had painted over a crucifix. And as soon as it was revealed, it became clear that this was really about the Reformation, Henry VIII creating Protestantism, essentially in the Church of England. And the religious nature of the message that was being conveyed had been painted out at some point by someone who thought it was, too hot to discuss or wanted to inhibit the meaning. So sometimes these overpaintings can actually be portals of discovery themselves.
That's amazing. Yeah, I mean, I was very shocked when I saw that little house gone. We actually used that in the publicity for the novel. We actually put the before and after images up and used that in publicity to show it out there. But it worked out great for me having that thing in there. Yeah, perfect.
Absolutely. Steve, thank you so much for joining us on this episode, and I'll see you in a few minutes for your Yale appearance. Thanks again.
See you then. Thank you. Bye-bye.
So the judge's panel from the Ghent Altarpiece is, alas, a copy made by Jan van Eyck and not the Van Eyck original, painted over and returned secretly to complete the altarpiece once again after the ransom demand following the theft failed. Well, one mystery solved, but another remains, for the judge's panel is still out there. Thanks for listening to Is It, the podcast. This series is produced by Urshka Charney, presented by Noah Charney, and is brought to you by Art Recognition. Based in Zurich, Art Recognition is the leading firm for AI-driven authentication of artworks. Featured everywhere from the art newspaper to Wired to The Guardian and beyond, Art Recognition uses the most definitive, sophisticated datasets and advanced processes to estimate the likelihood that a specific artist created an artwork. Backed by a multidisciplinary team that takes many dimensions of research into consideration, Art Recognition has a long track record of success at the highest level. Learn more at art-recognition.com. That's art-recognition.com. We'll be back next time with a new art historical mystery, a new possible artist behind the masterpiece, and a new guest expert. See you next time.